In the Middle Ages, castles weren't just places where nobles gathered to show off their embroidered cloaks or host banquets with more food than anyone could possibly eat. They were, above all, fortresses designed to withstand attacks, protect their inhabitants, and often serve as the last line of defense against invaders who didn't exactly come bearing gifts. Picture a medieval castle as the equivalent of a luxury bunker. Solid, intimidating, and packed with enough tricks to make any attacker regret getting out of bed that morning. But how did these massive stone structures hold their ground against hordes of enemies armed with swords, catapults, and sometimes months' worth of patience? Let's unravel the secrets of medieval castle defense, from the walls that made the bravest tremble to the traps that turned a siege into a nightmare for invaders. First, it's important to understand that a castle wasn't just a big building with a moat and a couple of towers for the lord to gaze wistfully at the horizon. It was an architectural war machine, built with a clear purpose: keep the outsiders out and the insiders alive. It all started with location. Castle builders didn't pick their spots randomly, like choosing where to pitch a tent at a campsite. Oh no! Castles were erected in strategic locations, steep hills, cliffs, or beside rivers, where the terrain itself was a natural barrier. If an army wanted to attack a castle perched atop a hill, they first had to climb, panting, in armor heavier than an ox, while the defenders watched from above, probably chuckling and betting on who'd trip first. The walls were the castle's first "hello, you're not welcome" to any would-be invaders. These weren't just any walls, like the ones in your house that crack if you hang a heavy picture. Castle walls could be several meters thick, built from solid stone and sometimes reinforced with inner layers of earth or rubble to absorb impacts. They were so sturdy that even catapults, hurling rocks the size of a pig, often only managed to tickle the structure.
Plus, the walls weren't straight like a modern highway.
They often had a curved or zigzag design to deflect projectiles and make it harder to use ladders or siege towers. Try scaling a curved wall, and you'd find yourself slipping like a rookie ice skater on a rink. But the walls didn't stand alone in their mission to thwart attackers. At the top were battlements, those jagged edges that look like a poorly cut crown. Battlements allowed defenders to shoot arrows or hurl objects while hiding in the gaps. And when we say objects, we're not just talking about rocks. The defenders got creative, boiling oil, burning pitch, or even manure if they wanted to add a dash of humiliation to the assault. Imagine climbing a wall, sweating in your armor, only to get doused with something that smells worse than a neglected stable. It wasn't exactly the kind of welcome that boosted troop morale. Towers, meanwhile, were like the wall's beefy bodyguards. They didn't just provide height for scanning the horizon, they were also firing platforms. From there, archers could rain arrows with precision that made invaders think twice about getting closer. Towers often jutted out from the walls, allowing defenders to shoot from the flanks in what's known as crossfire. If an enemy tried to approach with a ladder, they'd find themselves caught in a deadly pincushion of arrows from the front and sides. It was like trying to cross a busy street, except with lethal projectiles instead of cars. The moat was another gem of defense. Not every castle had one, but when they did, it was a headache for attackers. A moat could be a dry ditch filled with sharpened stakes or a body of water that forced invaders to swim in armor that wasn't exactly swimwear. Crossing a moat under a hail of arrows was no easy task, and if you made it to the other side, you still had to face the wall. Some castles even filled their moats with nasty surprises, like waste or traps, to ensure the journey was as unpleasant as possible. The main gate, which might seem like an obvious weak point, was designed to be anything but vulnerable. The doors were made of solid wood, often reinforced with metal, and protected by a portcullis, a heavy iron grate that could be lowered to block access. Behind the gate, there was often a narrow passage called a barbican, a death trap where invaders got stuck like mice in a maze. From above, defenders could fire arrows through murder holes in the ceiling, designed specifically for that purpose. If you managed to get past the gate, you'd likely wish you hadn't. But it wasn't all about passive architecture. Castles were filled with defenders armed to the teeth, and not with sticks and stones. Archers, equipped with longbows or crossbows, were the nightmare of any army that got too close. Crossbows, in particular, were feared because they could pierce armor like it was paper. Defenders also used their own siege weapons, like small catapults or ballistae, to launch projectiles from inside the castle. And if things got really dire, the castle's knights could launch a surprise charge, exploiting the chaos to scatter the attackers. A key aspect of defense was preparing for a prolonged siege. Castles were built to withstand months, even years, of isolation. Within their walls were storehouses packed with food, water, and supplies. Internal wells ensured the inhabitants didn't die of thirst, and granaries could feed a garrison for a long time. While attackers camped outside, freezing, starving, and probably arguing over who forgot the tents, the defenders could afford to wait, play cards, and occasionally lean out to taunt their enemies. Sieges, in fact, were more common than direct assaults. Attackers knew that taking a castle by force was like trying to open a can of sardines with a toothpick. Instead, they'd surround the castle and cut off its supplies, hoping the defenders would surrender from hunger or despair. But castles were ready for this. Besides storehouses, many had secret tunnels that allowed defenders to sneak out for provisions or send messengers for help. These tunnels were an ace up the sleeve, though sometimes attackers found them and used them against the castle, leading to underground battles that were as claustrophobic as they were epic. Attackers weren't idle, of course. They had their own tricks, like mobile siege towers, battering rams to smash gates, and catapults that launched everything from rocks to diseased corpses. Yes, biological warfare isn't a modern invention. But the defenders always seemed to have an answer. Against siege towers, they used hooks to topple them or fire to burn them. Against rams, they reinforced gates with earth-filled sacks or diverted blows with obstacles. And against catapults, well, sometimes you just had to duck and hope the enemy's aim was as bad as their strategy. Psychology played a big role too. Defenders knew a siege was as much a battle of wills as of weapons. So, they often made a show of confidence, even when things were tough. They'd sound trumpets, raise banners, and sometimes toss surplus food over the walls to convince attackers they had supplies to spare. It was the medieval equivalent of texting, "all good," while the world falls apart around you. Not all castles were the same, of course. Designs varied by region, budget, and the lord's level of paranoia. In England, Norman castles like Dover were known for their square towers and sturdy walls. In France, castles in the Loire Valley blended defense with a touch of elegance, because apparently, the French couldn't resist building something pretty, even in wartime. In the Holy Land, Crusader castles like Krak de Chevaliers took defense to another level, with multiple layers of walls and water systems that made sieges even tougher. As technology advanced, castles had to adapt. The arrival of gunpowder in the 14th century changed the game. Walls that once laughed at catapults now shuddered under cannon fire. Castles started incorporating lower, thicker walls with angled designs to deflect shots. But even then, the essence of medieval defense remained: make the enemy give up before they could get in. In short, defending a medieval castle was a mix of ingenious architecture, meticulous preparation, and a healthy dose of creativity. Every element, from walls to moats, was designed to make life miserable for invaders. And while attackers might arrive with massive armies and impressive war machines, the defenders had the advantage of terrain, patience, and often, a sense of humor that let them toss manure with a smile. Castles weren't just fortresses, they were a clear message: if you want in, you're going to have to work really hard for it. And most of the time, that work was too much for any army.